Welcome to the Grow Fast Podcast, where we talk with leading sales, marketing, and personal growth experts about how companies can accelerate sales, optimize marketing, and grow their businesses fast. Let's go.
Hey, Andrew, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Mark. It's good to be with you. How are you doing today?
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on the Grow Fast Podcast. Let me ask you, whereabouts are you located?
I am on the south side of Denver in Colorado on a kind of cold spring day. It's a little bit wet out there, a little bit cloudy, not the usual blue skies we get in Colorado.
Oh gosh, I wish I could turn my camera around right now and show you the beautiful blue skies that we have out here in Seattle. And I was going to say, even though you're from Denver, that means you're probably a Broncos fan. I'm not going to hold that against you. Well,
I'll tell you. So, I follow the Broncos, but I was born and bred in Scotland. So,
so you play a different kind of football.
Exactly. Well, football and rugby, right? So, one sport we call soccer. One is the same shape ball, a little bit different, but we play rugby. And when I moved over here 23 years ago now, I get into sport, but there's something missing when you didn't play it growing up and it wasn't part of your DNA when you're a kid and your dad or your family or whatever. I can get into it, but I just don't have the depth of it that maybe some people do.
I totally get it. And football, American football, there are so many tactics and strategies that if you haven't played the game, it's kind of really hard to get into the nuances of that. That said, we're going off on a tangent here, but I think that rugby and then soccer are two of the greatest sports in the world. If you look at, the global population that plays those sports, the number of countries around the world, and the fact that you can play up until your 50s or 60s in various leagues. I was in Japan and there was a rugby group there. The guys were, 50 plus. They modified rules in terms of the amount of contact that was allowed and so on and so forth. But with American football, pretty much after college, you're done, man. So...
I'm glad you said that. I just find that weird, right? You play a sport, probably you're pretty passionate about it and you enjoy it, you enjoy playing. And then for most people, they don't make as far as college, so they stop then. And for those that even make it to college, most don't make it to the pros, so they stop then. And there's no outlet after that. It just seems weird to me. I grew up in Scotland where Sunday soccer, Sunday football in the park was a thing. You go to any city, any town around the UK, frankly, on a Sunday, and people are playing football everywhere. And, people awesome. Play rugby everywhere. It's so much fun to do. You don't have to be the fittest and strongest athlete in the world still to play a sport and have some fun. So I'm a bit surprised it hasn't done more over here.
Totally agree with you. And I have 3 boys. They all play soccer. I started playing when I was 40 and I can still play now, because it's just kicking the ball around and running. I don't need to pad up, put a helmet on. Yeah, I want to talk to you because you're the founder of Unstoppable, which provides sales training to cybersecurity firms and salespeople. You are also the host of the Cyber Go-To-Market or GTM Talk podcast, and you're the chief connector of the Cyber GTM Go-To-Market jobs organization. So you got a lot of things going on. But before we dig into all that, maybe we can just start with the level set here. And I looked at your profile. You've done a lot of sales and sales leadership roles before you moved into training. What was behind your decision to go from kind of a sales, frontline sales and sales leadership position into a training position?
Yeah, I started selling. It was my first job after college, 1994, just to age myself a little bit. And I got into it. I thought, I'll give it a go for a couple of years, and then I want to go and start my own business was my whole idea. And I started working for this software company in London and, thought, God, this is actually pretty good. I could enjoy this. I seem to be okay at it. I wasn't a natural, but I seem to be pretty good at it, right? And I kind of got into the swing of things and started making some money. I thought, this is good. And I just went off on this career, kind of, runaway train a little bit and held on and went to some good companies, worked for some good people. And then I hit kind of 40 years old. I had my midlife crisis and I was sitting there going, okay, I've been doing this for almost 20 years at this point. Is this what I want to do for my next 20 years? Or should I be doing something completely different? And I was being successful. I went to President's Club a couple of years, both years prior to my move. but I was kind of in that mode, and I hired a coach actually, Mark. I found someone. I said, look, I need to talk this through because this is actually pretty serious, right? I don't want to give up what I'm doing, but I don't want to, be sitting in a coffee shop for the rest of my life trying to figure out what to do. So I talked to this coach, and he really helped me out. And he said, the thing that you really enjoy about being a sales leader is the helping people succeed, the coaching, the transformation that you can get someone, hire someone, get them going and see them achieve great things. That's the bit you enjoy. And the bit that I hated was the grind, the forecasting, dealing with deals that are slipping, dealing with the deals that go dark on you and helping reps get through that. I was like, oh my God, this is stressful and painful at the same time. But I came to the conclusion at the time that, there's no job that you can just do the glory stuff and the fun stuff and not take the rest of it with it. Right? Yeah. And I said to my coach, I said, yeah, that's great and all. I paid you all this money, but there's no job that does that. Right. And it was just weird. I was at this big company, and literally 2 months later, the head of learning and development at the company, who I'd got to know over a period, sent an email out to only like 20 people in a 5,000 employee company. People that she knew, say, does anyone know anyone who's been a sales leader and might want to make a change and become a coach to the North American sales leadership team? We're looking for someone who could work with 15, 20 sales leaders and help them be more successful and things like that. And I just sat there and I called up Lori immediately. I said, Lori, you're not going to believe this.
This is your coach?
But yeah, I said, Lori, this is the thing. Like, this is what I want to do. Let's talk. And 2 months later, I'd made the move into what was at the time was a coaching role. I worked with the sales leadership team and one-on-one, and I helped them with whatever challenges they had with their team or their business and things like that. So that's why I made the move. And it was and people said to me at the time, Mark, successful salesperson in software, you make a decent amount of money, and people said to me, well, do you not like making money? What are you doing, right? Why are you going over there? And I always had this idea that I wanted to work for some companies doing it to learn, and then I wanted to have my own business, going back to my original thing at the start of my career. So that was the idea of what I was trying to do back in, 2013, 2014.
And when did you actually launch your own training business?
I decided that January 2020 was the perfect time to lose the safety of a paycheck and benefits and all the rest of it and go out for my own. Right before, 2 months before COVID hit. And
the whole world had to pivot. No training. We can't do training.
Exactly. So yeah, 4 and a bit years ago now is when I decided to go for my own.
Wow. Well, I'm going to come back to that in a second. You touched on, you enjoyed some aspects of sales. And a lot of people enjoy the, individual producer roles because they have autonomy. There's clearly defined targets and this kind of many times an uncapped upside, right? So that earning potential there it draws a lot of people in. It does come with some baggage. It comes with some pressure as well. One thing that I've noticed is not all the best top performing salespeople can make the transition into the sales leadership roles or those training roles, because you have sometimes they have this lone wolf mentality. Have you seen something like that, or what are some, best practices to getting people from those, top individual performer roles into more of a leadership role?
I think it's endemic in the industry. My experience is that just what you said, people get promoted because they're good at selling into a job where actual day-to-day selling is about 20% of the success of the job. Now, you can make it 100% of your job, but then you're not being a good leader and a good manager at that point. And unfortunately, that's what people do, right? They default to what they know. And, I made these mistakes. I was like, gosh, if I can just get this team to sell like I did, then, things are going to be great, right? And, you kind of go in there as I did. This is 2001 when I got my first promotion to a leadership job. I thought, God, I'll have them sell my way. And it didn't work, right? And I remember when I got promoted, the president of the company said to me, he said, just so you know, Andrew, I've got no time to help you with this transition. So you're going to be on your own. And I was like, oh, sure, that's fine. You know, how difficult could it be? So I just kind of,
dealing with people.
Exactly. I did this all my life, you know, and I've worked for someone who's done it. So I know what to do and what not to do as well. Right. And sure enough, you know, I go in the first year and not that good. Right. And I got some feedback, from the team and from others. Look, you got to adapt, you got to change. So I think it's endemic. You know, what's interesting actually, Mark, when I made the move to start my own gig doing this, the first thing I actually went with was to say, why don't I become that trainer for our first line managers who haven't had training about how to be a great first line manager? So I went to my network and I said, look, you know, we all know this is a problem. I said, yeah, it's a problem. I said, okay, well, here's how I can help solve it, the outcomes, all the rest of it. And then it was like scratching of heads and looking the other way and going, well, I don't know. We might want to invest our money somewhere else. What about in the reps? And then it was like, well, that's stuff you used to do for us, you know, 3 years ago. Why don't you come and do that for us, right? So people seem to be really reluctant to make the change, and it's to invest in making the change for people. And, you know, there's some first line managers that make it and do quite well, and there's those that don't. I don't know if I have a secret success formula. I wonder if you do, or some ideas as well. I think that, I think what's different now, frankly, is when I made the change, there was no real content online for me to go to and say, oh crap, there seems to be this thing about, you know, it's not the same job. I should probably look into it. I think these days that's everywhere now. So at least there's a support structure out there. If you're sitting there going, okay, I'm about to get promoted or have done, and therefore I can pick up some things online about what to do and what not to do.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's interesting because I think you touched on one of the quote unquote secrets is that you can't go into a leadership role and expect everybody to do everything the way that you do it, right? I want mini me's everywhere, right? And that just doesn't work. And I also find that sometimes, and I want to ask you about this because I do sales training from time to time, and I've done it throughout my career. And some people are open and receptive to it, but a lot of times you're talking about people's personal behaviors, the way they communicate, and these are lifelong learned traits. And it can be kind of touchy when you say, hey, you know, maybe a better way to do that or a better way to say that would be like this. But I'm going to come back to that. It's interesting though, because I find that companies are open to investing in, you know, the training of the frontline salespeople. But when it comes to those first level managers, and you're like, hey, you know, I can help with that transition. They're like, and it's like they can't connect the dots on the ROI to that. And I see the ROI in a couple different perspectives. And I'd like to, you know, hear your perspective on this. Is one, you want to set those people up for success, because what you don't want is them to burn out, to lose, to leave, right? So you have that, you know, success and retention thing. But also, if you can make them 3% more effective in their role and they're managing 10 people, that's a 30%, you know, across everybody there, improvement there, total accumulative there. So I see it as a win-win from multiple points. But, you know, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think too often what people will do is default to are you helping deals come in and things like that is the way to think about it. But by far the biggest impact on a first line manager's success is the people in the team that they're managing. And if you're not good at attracting great talent and identifying great talent and then nurturing great talent, I don't care how good a coach or manager you are, you're going to fail because your team's just not going to be up to scratch. And yet again, we don't train people on actually how to go do that, how to attract great talent. So I'm with you on that, right? Looking at the ROI of saying, you know, just look at attrition rates and empty capacity. So, you know, empty territories, things like that. The numbers are compelling, and, you know, recruiters use it all the time to say, well, I can hire people for you faster and fill the gaps faster. I think we need to have the same mentality when you're looking at how you support the first line managers.
Totally agree. So let's talk about the nuances of selling in the cybersecurity industry. Okay. I worked in the cybersecurity industry. I worked for a Microsoft cybersecurity and compliance partner for 5 years. Okay. And what I found was that oftentimes, not just with us, but with everybody, especially the technology providers, is that they would show up and say, kind of scare tactics. This is the threat landscape and we're all going to die. But if you buy this pen, you might have a chance.
And how did that work for them?
What I found very quickly is that I'd like to think that I'm kind of intuitive or that I can kind of read the air, as the Japanese say. And I would see that people's eyes would gloss over and they would say, here they go again. Okay, another scare tactic. Come on, we've heard this all before. We know the threat landscape. That's why, we're talking to you. We want to know what, we want to have like a real conversation here. That's my observation again. But, the cybersecurity industry is immensely broad in terms of the types of services, solutions, technologies out there. And it's very deep in terms of the level of those services. So over to you. What are your observations?
Yeah, I think the fundamentals of selling are the same. There's not like there's medic for cybersecurity sales teams or challenger sale. Yeah, there's nothing like that, right? But you're dead on, right? There's definitely nuances, and one of them is just that. I mean, it to me is an absolute no to walk in, and we call it FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right?
Yeah, right.
Trying to scare people, say, there's this whole threat area you haven't considered before. I mean, I guarantee you that the people you're talking to have been in the industry for many years, a lot longer than the salesperson that's actually trying to tell them that there's something they don't know about. And therefore, it just falls on deaf ears or glossy eyes, as you were saying. So that's something you avoid. And frankly, I got into the industry in 1998. That's the first time I sold a cybersecurity product. And even then, people will start glossing over a little bit. And that was nascent days. So you gotta just stay away from it. It's interesting, good sales practice says you sell to the biggest pain point or potential pain point someone has, but you can't do that in cyber, right? You can't go in all guns blazing. The other mistake that people make is, this company got breached last week with this threat or whatever it might be. If you had our software, you wouldn't have got breached, right? Does not go down well either, right? So you got to thread the needle a little bit. So I think that's one aspect you got to be careful of. The other one is, at the end of the day, you're selling to suspicious and guarded people, right? They're just who they are.
Totally agree. That's the nature of their job, right?
They're paid to be.
You send them a random email saying, hey, I've got the latest, greatest. And they're like, delete.
That's the thing, right? And I'll tell you stories. I mean, first of all, this idea that you send an email to someone in cybersecurity and expect them to download something or click something in your email, they don't do it.
Click our demo. Yeah.
I mean, it's just not something they do. And by the way, and I've talked to security teams that do this, and I tell you it happens, is if your company that you're working for, or you get a name for yourself at your target as someone who sends too many emails or crappy emails or cold calls us to death or whatever, they'll actually go into their gateway stuff and block you. So they go into their email system and say, whatever, at blah, blah, blah.com domain, just block it. And you don't even get through. People do it. So this is where you be careful of, right? You got to say, okay, these people have a very suspicious mindset, and they've got a bit of power to actually block us if we're doing something stupid. So you got to be careful. And then the other thing I always think about with these people, Mark, is the stakes are high, right?
Oh, totally.
So let's contrast this. And this is just in the last couple of years, the stakes are high. So if you're in charge of the website for a company, let's say you're a retailer and you do a lot of e-commerce and your job is, SVP of e-commerce, let's say.
And you're doing $1 million a day in revenue. And
you're seen as the lifeline of the company in retail because, they don't make money in brick and mortar anymore, right? And the website goes down. Right. Let's say that happens. The head of the e-commerce is going to get all sorts of scrutiny and crap from up above about the website being down. It'll get up as fast as possible, and you got a black eye. You'll be embarrassed. And if it happens 3 or 4 times, they'll be like, "What's the heck's going on?" And if it keeps happening, the worst that happens to that person is they get fired. Right. In cybersecurity, the worst that could happen to you is you get prosecuted. So there was a CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, a couple of years ago now, Joe Sullivan. He was a CISO at Uber, and they had a breach that happened, and he did all the right things. He collaborated with the executive team, the whole thing about what happened. But somewhere in the mix, the way they reported it or handled it wasn't quite right. And he ended up getting prosecuted for it. Now, he didn't go to jail, but that's what happened to him, right? And, people...
Good luck trying to get a job again.
Well, that's the thing. He's on his own. Like, he's doing a lot of consulting with companies now about how not to be like him, right? Which is,
right.
He's probably making do better than he did before. But that's interesting. You're talking to people that are very suspicious of you and what you're selling in the world out there, and their stakes are high. And it just makes for a very interesting sales culture where you have to be very careful how you do things. You have to be very nuanced and make sure when you engage with people that you're doing it from the right mental mindset yourself, of not just trying to sell something, but help someone achieve things and not get fired and things like that.
So then what is the answer if you are responsible for outbound sales? Okay. And I don't even know if that even exists anymore, but it was, when I started in sales, it was a big part of it. And I'm running a SaaS company right now, and it's still part of what we do. I'm going to come back to that in a second, because there's an overlap, I believe, between sales and marketing these days. But if a portion of your responsibility is to do some kind of outreach, how do you do it?
Well, you still do the same tactics. You just have to adapt to the people that you're talking to. So it's not like you don't send emails. You just don't send them with links and downloads, right? It's not like you don't make calls. You just don't bombard people with calls. And when you talk to them, you imagine all the things that the problem areas that people might have. It's not just they might get breached, right? It might be, for example, that their time to spot a breach might be too long. It might be the fact that their ability to resolve incidents might be too long. It might be the fact that they have to have 10 people on a help desk dealing with password resets because their way of doing passwords is so bad. So you have to think about the angles around it, which are much more, frankly, business orientated, as opposed to just the cyber, the pure, threats and breaches angle to it. And that's how you can start, picking up things and getting into the conversations that you want to have when you have those sorts of conversations.
So you could actually even maybe reach out to a CFO and say, you're probably spending X amount of dollars on password resets, for example. We have a solution that could bring that down to X, something like that. And that person would be like, hey, that makes sense. Maybe the cyber team should look at this or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, all that except for the CFO side, because, at the end of the day, they don't want to listen to nitty gritty stuff like that, right?
Okay.
So but right now, usually the CISO is someone who reports into the CEO or one down from the CEO and has to regularly report to the board. So they got a lot of power, right? They got a lot of visibility inside organizations now, much more than they had like 15, 20 years ago. So you can go to the security team and start talking about that, but not just the security team, but the infrastructure team, depending on what aspect of cyber you have a solution for.
Sure. Makes sense. I noticed, when I was reading through your background, is one of the things that you do is you, instead of selling, you coach your trainees on, instead of selling technical features, you position business value. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. We have a plague inside the cybersecurity industry. I'm sure other sectors do as well, where we love our products that we're building. We love the technology that we have. There's 3,700 vendors in cybersecurity. Roughly 3,500 of them have less than 1,000 employees, right? So they're smaller companies. And that means, the founder, the founding team heavily influence how the things are done. And they're all tend to be technical people. So what tends to happen is when you're a seller, you're given all this technical stuff to go and talk to your prospects with. But I think that's a mistake. And, when you go and engage with people, you got to think about not just the technical fit, but why an organization might make a transformation. And especially right now, in the last couple of years, deals have slowed down so much. The scrutiny is through the roof from people. They might not have the CFO title, but there's someone who cares about budget much more than they did 3 or 4 years ago. And they're killing deals or slowing deals down because there's no real business reason to make that change that's happening right there and then. And I saw a quote from a CFO a couple of years ago, and I think he was talking to some sales teams, and he said, you got to view that the role of the sales process and the sales cycle is actually to build the business case for change, right? I thought that was really eye-opening for me. It's like, gosh, I certainly didn't do that back in the day, right? I was so focused on, sell my stuff. It's got some features and benefits and, all the rest of it. And I think when you look at the lens through, well, how do we help this company make a transformation that's going to have a business impact? Your chances of rising above the noise in the industry, for one, but also getting the right approvals and buy-in from senior people increases dramatically. And one of the things that I talk to my teams about, Mark, just one last thing on this, is to say, if you're selling something at the company, would you rather be selling something into the director of information security in the cloud world because they've got a problem with something they're trying to solve? Or would you rather be selling something to the company that's going to help the CEO realize their big initiative to expand the supply chain into Southeast Asia, and they need better and more secure connectivity in Southeast Asia, right? I know where I would go. One side has deal oxygen, I call it, right? It's got money, it's got political capital, it's got people putting their careers on the line to go make big changes, and one is some person somewhere thinking, it'd be really nice if we get a bit more visibility into our cloud, right? It's just very different.
Well, it's funny, 'cause you just answered my next question, which was, can you give me kind of an example or a use case of that kind of tactic of understanding, helping the company make that transition versus just selling them whatever's in your bag. But how do you find that out as a salesperson? And what's the process? Because I call the guy and say, hey, I've got stuff for intrusion detection, and I'm going to talk to this person, but I would prefer to talk to the CEO about this, their overall higher level objectives. How do you do that?
Yeah, what I talk to my clients about is, you don't have to know perfect information. You have to have a defendable value hypothesis, right? So let's take the Southeast Asia thing, right? So you might find that out for public companies in all sorts of public places, right? Maybe the CEO did a speech. Maybe the CIO did a talk or interview somewhere. Maybe in their annual report, their 10K Qs, things like that, they talk about some initiative that they've got going on, right? And then what you got to do is look at that and you got to squint a little bit, because it doesn't say, we need to get into Southeast Asia, and by the way, we need some cybersecurity products to help us do that, right?
Right.
So what you have to do is squint a little bit and say, okay, how might we help with that? If I was to sit down with the CISO tomorrow, and I didn't want to talk about my product, I want to talk about how I can help him. Could I say, I was thinking about what your CEO said on the analyst briefing 3 weeks ago. He said that the expansion to Southeast Asia is critical for the growth targets for the next couple of years. And it means you're taking on, 2,500 more suppliers in that spot. I was wondering if, as you were looking to enable that, you're thinking about how do we securely bring them into our environment and share information, but only the right information, things like that. Is that something that you're thinking about as well, about how to enable that? That's how I go about doing it, right? Yeah.
I like it. You've demonstrated that, hey, you know what, you are paying attention. You've done your research, right? You care. And two, you bring up the fact that whether it's a CEO or some other high level executive in the company, right away, you're going to get their attention. Okay. So what did you hear them say? Right. And three, you're talking about something that's relevant. When I was with the Microsoft cybersecurity compliance partner, we actually did that in a couple of cases because we were selling managed services, a lot of what we're doing. And managed services, if a company is expanding into one of the markets that we covered, it was a kind of a no-brainer. So what are you going to do there for your services, right? Versus a global technology infrastructure platform where maybe they already have hey, we're on AWS or we're on Azure or whatever, it's done. But with managed services, a lot of times their managed services provider would only cover one specific geographic region, and there's tons of opportunities every time a company wants to expand.
And I think also managed services, Mark, right? Maybe you'll validate this. There's a lot of people trying to do managed services, and frankly, if I'm a little bit critical, not doing it that well. So the ability to not try and differentiate on, well, we're a little bit better because our response time is better is maybe one way to do it that I wouldn't do it. But then think about, well, how can we be more strategic for these organizations? And we might be something, we can be a partner for them over time in all sorts of different ways and have that conversation versus the lower down one. Is that kind of where you were going with what you were doing when you were engaging? Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And, by the way, we can differentiate ourselves here locally, but it's more difficult because there's thousands of providers. But of those thousands, how many of them can actually provide support, the same level of support, local language in Brazil or other South American countries or in Asia, right? And now all of a sudden that group or that it becomes a lot smaller, right? And so then So what we talked about it a little bit earlier in terms of the overlap between sales and marketing when it comes to prospecting. What are you seeing in the cybersecurity space?
So prospecting is a challenge. A lot of companies I talk to are, in some version of, I need more pipeline. And the old ways don't work as well as they used to do. But I think, I'll give you an example. So when I moved over from the UK in 2000, I took a territory in Silicon Valley and I identified, as any good salesperson does, my ABC accounts, targets, and I had 25 accounts in my A list. And in the first 3 months, I cold called and got meetings with 17 of the 25 security leaders in that group, right?
Awesome.
Now, very different environment, right? I don't know the exact number. I'm going to guess there might have been 100 vendors or maybe 50 vendors in cybersecurity with, maybe one rep covering that area. Even back then, people weren't comfortable doing cold calling. So I knew if I got good at it, I'd probably, rise above. But these days there's 3,700 vendors and there's lots of people bombarding and things like that. So, that kind of old way of, I'll just kind of make some calls and I'll get there isn't working so well. Our emails are not getting through as much as they used to. But my thought about this market is maybe a little bit different to some. I think the key question we got to ask ourselves is, if things are not working as well as they did before, we got to say, well, compared to what? Right. So it's okay saying, well, cold calls don't work as well, or emails don't work as well, or LinkedIn messages don't work as well, or networking, whatever it might be, slot in your statement that people make these days. My question is, well, compared to what, right? I mean, if your response rate on email goes down from 2% to 1%, but still it's better than everything else, it's better than everything else, right?
Yeah.
And you got to figure that bit out. So I think that's one thing, as people are thinking about this, just be cautious of, right? Just because something's down doesn't mean to say you ditch it, right? It might still be as good or better than something else.
I recently interviewed John Barrows from JB Sales. In fact, I think that episode's going live today. And he was coaching one of his mentees who was getting a kind of a lower response rate on LinkedIn. And he said, you got to take the long view on this. It's not day to day. Hey, it's like you're planting seeds and after a while the things start to grow, right? So you got to take the long view. And unless you have something else that is much better, what else are you going to do?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, I think that, back in when I moved over, it was short-term view. Let's get those meetings and go. I'm totally with John on that, right? You've got to just think longer term, more strategic. I'll give you an example. So 7-8 years ago, even, I was at a startup. We were pre-product and we were trying to get to the CISO and talk about how our product was going to change the world and all the rest of it, right? And I was trying to get into Cisco, and the CISO at Cisco at the time, he was known as being someone who could have hated salespeople and all the rest of it, right? But that was my target. One of the bigger companies in my territory had to go after it. And I started doing the things that you do. I called him, I emailed him, didn't get anything back. And then I started just going around him, right? Not around him, above him, but just figuring out, who else knew him. And it turned out that one of our board members knew him and he put a call in, nothing got back from that. Another person we knew, the CISO was on the board of his other company. He didn't get back from that. And we're just trying. We're kind of scratching our heads going, this is kind of weird, right? And then I was, one day I started searching in YouTube and I found a video of him speaking at a conference like 3 years prior to that date. And literally in like the 22nd minute, he was asked a question and he said our value prop, right? He basically said, I think the industry needs to move towards this sort of thing, right? And I just sort of stopped dead on the spot. So I pinged him the email. And I said, John, I know you won't click on this link, but if you search on YouTube for your speech or whatever and go to 22 minutes and 23 seconds, if you still believe what's right there, we should talk because that's what we're delivering. And I remember his response back was within half an hour. And he said, Andrew, you have me surrounded.
That's awesome.
So I think, he got the messages from the board members. He saw my emails and heard my calls. And then finally, the straw that brought the camel back was that relevance for what he said,
Sure.
right? And we got going. I think these days, back to your point or John's point about, play the long game, I think you have to think like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is not try and hit 100 people a week, but say, okay, this week, here's 5 to 10 people I really want to figure out how we have a conversation with. How do I get each of them surrounded with all these different ways to try and reach them without being obnoxious about it, right? But how can I just try these different ways?
Totally agree. In fact, to go back to John for a second, he spends for his business an hour a day prospecting, and the majority of that hour is spent on trying to figure out how to get into one prospect. So it's really kind of a deep dive versus a kind of a shoot and spray kind of thing.
Great point.
Let's talk a little bit about the kind of training that you provide at Unstoppable. What are the different programs, and how do you engage with your customers?
Yeah, I have 2 main programs. I only work right now with cybersecurity companies and the sales teams at cybersecurity companies, not because what I do is only for them. It just is where I'm most comfortable.
Yeah, sure.
I remember a few years back, I was at a company and we brought in a very, very high ticket training company to help with something. And the trainer stood up in the first minute and said, well, when I sold fax machines at Xerox in 1990 or something like that, I just remember all the super experienced people in the room, all each other going, oh my God, this is not going to be good, right? So anyway, I focus on cybersecurity because when I stand up, I've walked in their shoes. I've probably sold the products that they've sold selling right now. And I have 2 programs I work with. Sorry,
and you've dealt with the personas that they're selling to, which is hugely important, I think.
And my stories are about the CISO at Cisco, not about the office manager at wherever, right? 20 years ago.
In charge of buying fax machines. Yeah.
And I see people leaning in, and then I see people kind of go, let's pay attention. So anyway, that's why I do that. So the 2 programs that I run, one is, think of it like an outsourced sales enablement. There's lots of companies with sales teams of, let's say, 10 to 20 to 30 people who just can't quite justify having a person full-time on board and paying them all the money and all the rest of it to help the team, yet the team needs help, right?
Right.
So, wouldn't it be good if there's someone that they could bring in, almost like a fractional outsourced enablement person who's done the job before, sold the stuff before, who could help them. And that's what I'll do. I'll go in for a longer term engagement and help them with a bunch of different things. And then the second program I run is my value selling program. That's essentially a 3-month program. I go in and I help people transition from selling features and benefits into selling, business value, business outcomes, and having the behavior change and the assets change and things like that to go with that. So those are the 2 programs that I probably do, 95% of the time.
So the first one, I guess it would be really dependent upon the customer you're dealing with in terms of what their current situation is, what their market looks like, what their team looks like, and you kind of figure out where you can bring some value. They probably already have some ideas. Marketing team's doing this, and our sales team's doing something completely opposite. We need to get them aligned, or our salespeople are all going out there, saying different things to the market, or we need to align our prospecting methods. So
exactly.
But with the second one, which sounds more like a defined set program, how does that work? Is it like a couple hours a week for that 3 months, or do you have like a kickoff session that's a half day, or what do you do?
Yeah, the first probably 2 or 3 weeks are a bit more consulting rather than training. We need to figure out what the assets are that the team has available and how we need to change them. Often we have to get clarity amongst the leadership team on some key things like how do we differentiate, how are we truly different, things like that, right? And then it goes into a weekly training for the team. And then I do small group coaching. So it's groups of 3 to 4 reps at a time. And we do coaching to support what happened in the training. And what's cool these days, of course, is, most companies have access to one of the conversation intelligence tools, whether it's Gong or Chorus.
Sure.
And they can actually bring snippets and calls to these coaching sessions. Say, okay, Andrew, I tried what you said last week and it worked, or it was terrible. Help me out here, right? What do we do? What did I do wrong?
It was terrible. We did it wrong.
And so through a combination of tailoring it up front, so it's actually their words and languages and my frameworks. Mm-hmm. With some good interactive training. I do workshop training. I don't do lecturing training. So we're working online in collaboration tools, and then the small group coaching that I found is a good combo to try and get the behavior change that you mentioned before, right? But the way I think about it, Mark, honestly, is that you get a team of, let's say, 100 sellers together. You probably get 15 or 20 that will never change their ways, no matter what, right? They'll rather get fired than change their ways. It's kind of their thing. You got a heavy group in the middle of about 60 or 70 who are really open to change with the right message and the right focus and, talk to them the right way. And you got 10 or 15 who are, I'm into any change that makes me better. Right. And, they're ready for this. They're sponges.
I think one of the best mindsets that people can have in any role, but in particular in sales, because, you do face a lot of obstacles, challenges, refusals, denials, is you have to always be, one, you have to have thick skin. Just, let stuff roll off you. Don't take it personal. But beyond that, you always need to be learning. And as part of that learning process, you can get this cognitive dissonance where this is my belief, and you get this signal that is, incongruent with your belief, and you kind of push it away. I think you need to be open to that. And I think it was Mark Andreessen said something like, I have strong beliefs, super strong beliefs that are loosely held. And I love that, man, because, he's, I don't know how old he is, but even, you can imagine that, like, the ego with somebody like that and the amount of knowledge, but he's willing to let go. And if he's willing to let go and change and pivot, I think we all should be, because, this is the way it was always done. I used to always call people and, get the meeting. Things have changed. And it was on LinkedIn. Well, now LinkedIn's evolving. So I have to evolve. And if I can't, it's not going to work.
I'm sure you've seen this as well, is you get the people that in response to something you say, there are those that say, that'll never work.
Totally. Right? Dude, I've heard that so many times.
my market, my territory, my clients, whatever it is, right? That'll never work for my clients, right?
Yeah.
And then you get the ones that say, I'm not sure about that, but I'm willing to learn and listen and try, right? And, I'd much rather be working with the ones that are open to a conversation. I'm not saying that everything that we train everyone on is going to be life-changing for them, but I at least want them to take it on board and say, okay, I can see how that might work for me. Let me give it a try.
It's funny because I spent about 20 years off and on leading businesses across Asia. And I've heard that specific argument applied to in Korea. It'll never work. In fact, in 1997, I was with a publishing company that was ahead of what Alibaba was doing at the time. We were taking all of our print content from trade magazines and putting it online. The company was Global Sources, went public in 2000. I was managing or running the office in Korea in 1997, 98. And the Korean office, we said, hey, we're going to take all the print content, we're going to put it online, and you're going to sell, product placements, and you're going to help these exporters promote their products all around the world to buyers. And they said, in Korea, internet never worked. And it was like, and I was, I think, 32 at the time, 33, and I had an office of 45 salespeople, and they were all, in Korea, it's very hierarchical. The older you are, the smarter you are, or the more authority you have, so on. And I was like, it's going to work. The world is changing. Yeah, but not in Korea. And literally 2 years later, Korea became one of the most wired countries in the world, right? Wow. And it was just, but it wasn't me making the change. It was when they collectively, as a culture and as a country, decided change. They went lightning fast, right? But I learned very early on, man, as a kind of a change agent, it's not a one and done. It's a process. And it's a continual thing. And I think with sales training, it's similar with a lot of people. You have to kind of, here's where we're going to go, and here's what, and just kind of keep going with it.
It's interesting you say that. I've actually got one of my bigger clients. We're rolling it out to the APJ team in May. So I might come back to you for some tips about how to get past any inbuilt biases about things working or not working. But it's just the nature of people, humans, right? Change.
We're resistant to change, right?
We are. And if you've been doing things a long way, a certain way, I get it, I understand it, right? But it doesn't mean to say a new way might not work for you.
Totally. Tell me a little bit about the Cyber GTM Talk podcast.
Yeah, I started off in 2019. It was the fall of 2019. And maybe like you, Mark, I'd been listening to podcasts for a while. I wasn't early, but I started listening maybe 2012, 13, something like that. And it took me 6 years to go, well, I might just do one of my own. But I started off, my philosophy with these things is ready, fire, aim, right?
I like that. No, I'm just saying.
Don't waste 6 months trying to be perfect before you start. Just
no analysis paralysis. In fact, no analysis.
Exactly. And when I started off, it was very different than what it is now. I started off and I had no idea what I was doing. I was like, okay, I got a microphone, and I was just talking, and I didn't know how to prepare to do a podcast, all this sort of stuff.
Were you nervous?
Oh yeah. I was nervous, and I had imposter syndrome as well, right? I was like, I can't just go on a podcast and start preaching about selling, right? Who am I to do all this? So actually, what I started off doing was I'd be reading sales books, and I would just read a paragraph of a sales book, and then I talk about it. I'd say, one of my favorite books is Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play, right? And I say, okay, on second chapter, Monaghan talks about this, here's my thoughts about it, right? And it was just a very easy way for me to get into it, right? And then I started doing more of my own content purely, and then I started interviewing people. And now what I do is I orient it around the question of how could a cybersecurity company grow sales faster? And when I bring on guests, so when I talk, there's some variation or subset of that question. So I often, right now, I'm interviewing CROs, the chief revenue officers at cybersecurity companies. I started doing chief marketing officers, sometimes CEOs, and then sometimes experts. I had a guy on. This is really cool, actually. These hidden gems. I don't know if you find this, Mark, but these hidden gems that you find out. So one of my things is that if in a busy market like cybersecurity, and you substitute in most markets these days, how you actually position the company and use narrative to do it can really matter, right? You can get a lot of impact if you do it well, and it can really hurt you if you don't do it well. So I've been on the lookout for people who do that, who are really good at doing that positioning stuff, right? And I talked to a guy called Andy Raskin a couple of years ago, and he's one of the doyens of narrative. Anyway, I hit up a CMO at a company a couple of months ago and said, hey, why don't you come on? And he said to me, Andrew, I might do, but honestly, the person you want to talk to is this guy called Shlomi Ashkenazi. He works for me. He's the guy, right? Okay. And I told Shlomi, I said, my first reaction is, okay, I'm getting passed down, right? Yeah. Yeah. We've been in sales. We know when you're passed down, right?
But yeah.
And I thought, God, I hate getting passed down. I want the big name. I want the big title, right? But I thought, okay, I'll take a look. So I looked at Shlomi's LinkedIn, and his second line in his about section was, in the last 5 years, Shlomi's repositioned 60 companies.
Wow.
So I thought, well, there's my guy, right? So I talked to him and brought him on. He was awesome. I said, so if I was, and what I do actually, one thing I do on this podcast, Mark, is rather than talking generic stuff, we made up a company last year called Cyber Donut, right? And Cyber Donut's a Series A company. It's got 10 sales reps and a couple of people in marketing. They're trying to get from customer 30 to customer 60, things to do that. So I said to Shlomi, I said, okay, let's talk about how the management team at Cyber Donut might reposition the company. Let's get some specifics in here and make it real. It was awesome. I loved it. So I love these conversations I get to have as part of having the podcast.
That's awesome. I have a long car ride today, and I'm going to put that episode on and listen to it. So that's awesome. And I think you said you recorded well over 200 episodes right now, right?
I think we're about 240, 238, something like that. Yeah.
That's awesome. Going back, I remember when I recorded my first podcast, it was with a friend of mine, and we were going to do one about like working out or whatever. And this is before I did the Secure Talk podcast and anything else. And I remember this is a friend of mine, like from high school, and I was like sweating because I was like, oh my God, it's nobody's listening, right? But now it's like, whatever, man. I love it.
Why did you stop doing the Secure Talk one and start doing this one?
So I started doing the Secure Talk because I was in that space and I wanted to learn about the space. And I thought one of the best ways to learn about it is to talk to a lot of people. But how am I going to get a chance to talk to all these people in a long form, like an hour at a time? I'll do a podcast. And then I started getting in the beginning, I was interviewing people kind of in our just little circle, but then it didn't take too long. And I started having publicists reaching out to me and saying, hey, we've got the CEO of this company. They want to be on. And I was talking to these really high level people and I didn't know much at all. I still don't know that much about cybersecurity. But I faked it until I made it. And the show kind of just took off. Long story short, though, after 161 episodes, I moved into this co-founder CEO role of a new SaaS startup. I consult with a couple different companies. I also do some sales consulting, and I just had too much on my plate. And the passion and interest for cybersecurity was kind of waning. I still think it's an amazing industry, and there's so much going on there, and it's so important. But you've only got so many hours in the day. I put a post on LinkedIn saying, hey, we're looking for new leadership for the Secure Talk podcast. And I was approached by a couple different companies, and a company called StrikeGraph decided to take over, ownership of it. And I did a transition with Justin Bills, the CEO, and he's off to the races right now. He's kind of repackaged it and taking it in a new, improved direction. And I love it. So,
yeah, that's awesome. It's good you're able to hand it over. Usually, if you search through podcasts online, suddenly you just find a podcast just stop.
Yeah, I wasn't sure, but I thought there was some value there, and because all of that content, and if you're in the sales and marketing side, especially the marketing side, you look at all that content, and it's like, wow, this could be some value, and like I said, a couple different organizations felt the same, and it worked out. Let me ask you about the cyber GTM jobs, because you are the chief connector. And I'm assuming you're working for organizations providing sales, training, and consulting. You're also doing the podcast. So people maybe reach out to you and say, hey, we're looking for this kind of position. And go ahead.
The genesis of it was 18 months ago or so. There was a slowdown in tech. I don't know if you experienced it as well, but everyone was told, stop spending money by their VCs. There won't be more money for a couple of years. And people, the first thing to do is start laying people off, right? So a bunch of layoffs. And it's still going on, frankly, 18 months later. And my thought at the time was, look, I know there's jobs out there. There's not as many as there was, but there's no one place to go and look at cybersecurity sales jobs or marketing jobs. I should probably start doing that, right? And I just said, let's just give it a go. Then it kind of evolved. It's been through a couple of different generations. And now what I'm doing is thinking this could be a leg of my business as opposed to something I just do for a bit of fun and to help out. So my thought is that I want to have that one place that people go to find all go-to-market jobs, whether it's marketing, sales, customer success, the whole lot. And right now in the mode of taking jobs off career sites, and then starting to talk to people, talent acquisition, TA folks at these companies saying, why don't you do a sponsorship? Why don't you do more than just, let me take your jobs? One of the advantages I have of the podcast and, the reach that I have on LinkedIn and things like that is I can put together a package, right? I can say, look, not only will I do your jobs, but, I can promote them in different ways as well. And people tend to like that sort of stuff. So, I just saw my friends and people I know in the industry getting laid off for no reason except the company didn't have as much money as they thought they did. And I wanted to help out and see if there's a way to get people back into jobs.
So is it a full-blown portal at this point? Or is that's where you're kind of moving towards?
No, it's a full job board. There's 600 jobs getting loaded up today.
Wow.
Onto it, and it's off to the races. And I don't know if your listeners go into cyber at all, but if you're interested in that type of job, you can go in there and put your ideal job in and get alerts sent to you once or twice a week as jobs in your area or your sub-market or your type of job come up. You'll get the emails coming through with them.
What's the outlook look like? Because a couple of years ago, everybody was saying cyber is the place to be. There's a runway of 10, 15 years of growth and development here. Obviously, things fluctuate in the short term, but the general trend and trajectory is upward and onward and upward.
I mean, unfortunately, as a market, I think is bullish, and I say unfortunately because it means that bad things are happening to companies and things like that, right? I mean, one of the unique factors inside cyber is there's people actively trying to tear you down, right? There's attackers from all over the world. Often those attackers, adversaries, are much better funded than you are as you're running your cybersecurity program inside these large companies. Sometimes it's nation states, right? It's Korea, North Korea, it's China doing things that we wish they wouldn't do. So there's always going to be that changing, morphing, growing adversary out there. As long as there's that, then companies need to invest to protect themselves against it. And one aspect of it is the tools, another aspect is the people, and another aspect is the processes they use. So, as you say, there's going to be ups and downs, and turns left and turns right here and there. But I don't know, unless something completely changes in the world, dynamics of the world, geopolitical environment, there's always going to be a need for more tools, different tools, better tools.
Absolutely. Hey, I just got a couple more questions. Top 2 or 3 tips for anybody going into any sales role in a B2B context.
I'll tell you one that it's going to be hard for someone to do, but if you're strong, you can do it. Is you're going to go into a B2B. My experience is in tech, so I'll talk to that, Mark, if you don't mind. So my experience in tech is you go into a company and their version of training you up for success is to tell you how great they are for the first week, right? This is what we do. This is the amazing products that we have. Here's our competitors, but they all suck and we're awesome. And here's how we beat them. And do you know that we win 100% of our POCs, and all this stuff kind of comes at you, right? And in fact, what I would advocate is if you go join a company like that, is go waist neck deep into the problems your prospects have. Go understand the prospects, understand what their day-to-day life is like, figure out what gets them hired and fired, what gets them promoted, their fears and frustrations, things like that. Focus on that. And then you want to know, what does your company do and how you can help with those things. And I think, unfortunately, I think of it like, you ever see those, that experiment where the professor's at the front of the class and he's got a big glass beaker and he gets a bunch of rocks and he fills the thing up with rocks. And he asks the students, is there any room for more? And they go, no. And he goes, well, here's some sand. And the sand is, I feel like, when you join a company, that's like your brain, right? And I think we make a mistake if we fill someone's brain, the beaker, with all the stuff about us first, and then fill in the gaps with, stuff with the prospects. I do it the other way around, right? Fill your brain full of the prospects and their problems, and then fill in the gaps with the products and things like that your company sells. So I would do that first. And then the second thing I would do, whether your company has a program for this or not, is go find out the 5 top sellers and buy them lunch, dinner, whatever it might be, and go hang out with them and say, what shortcut things for me.
How do you do it?
I might not do exactly what you do, but tell me what you do. And if you're in my shoes, what should I avoid doing that is a complete mistake that you see the company might try and get me to make? And just learn like that is how I would do it.
I think that's some great advice. I remember my first real sales role, and I met with the country manager. I rarely would have a chance to meet with him, but I just said, what advice would you give me? And he gave me 2 things that I still remember to this day in terms of how to organize my day, and which type of prospects I should go after and how I should present myself. And he did it. This is all like in a 10-minute conversation. I took notes of it and I did it. And guess what? It worked. I was just like, okay, what about, a big part of sales is personal productivity, whether that's time management, whether, it's learning or it's, investing in yourself. Do you have any, personal productivity tips?
It's something that I know I need to get better at. I'm going to tell you. A couple of things that I do reasonably well is I start off the week and I try and figure out what my big nuts are for the week, what the big things I've got coming up. Make sure I've got clarity in my mind about what those are, rather than having them hit me in the face as I go, oh crap, it's Thursday morning. I've got an interview with Mark.
I've got this meeting with, right?
Yeah.
Going to be on a podcast with this guy.
What am I going to say? So, I want to make sure I'm sitting there on Sunday night or Monday morning going, okay, I've got some plan to get through that. I'm a believer that I try and do things on the go as well. So for example, I'll tell you one. These conversation intelligence tools I talked about, Gong, Chorus, there's a whole bunch of them now where they record your calls. One of the things I started doing was making sure I got the app on my phone. So I go for a walk or go for a drive. It's just me. I don't listen to music. I'll sometimes just, my client is this company here. I queue up 4 or 5 calls and I'll put the snippets from the calls onto that and listen to it as I go along. And it's really powerful actually when you do that, and you could get ingrained into their way of doing things without actually sitting there in my office going, let me carve out 2 hours to listen to calls.
No, I find that some of my my most productive listening is when I'm walking, and whether it's to audiobooks or to podcasts or other things. But do you re-listen to your old episodes ever?
I try not to, no.
Yeah.
Why do you ask?
Because sometimes I relearn lessons that I forgot. Every time I talk to somebody, I learn, and I take notes, and everything that I circle is something new learned. And there's probably, 8-10 different circles on here. So these are like new things that I've learned. And sometimes I forget these lessons, right? And so it's nice to kind of, listen in. And also sometimes I recognize that, hey, damn it, I got to quit talking so much, stuff like that,
What do you do with those circles though? Do you have a way to then put them somewhere so you can always go back to them?
Yeah. So what I do is I typically will rewrite the notes, and I keep this because when I write the show notes for each episode, I have a reference of things that we talked about. But I typically will rewrite them and then throw them someplace that hopefully I can find. Sometimes I'm trying to get better. Here's a personal productivity thing that is not going to be news to anybody except for me, but I'm trying to start to kind of be more systematic about using Evernote, for example, and organizing my notes so that I can go back through it. Typically, I'll spend a couple hours on the weekend reviewing. It could be notes from a couple of years ago, because sometimes I'm like, oh, light bulb, I forgot about that, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
One of the great things about doing the podcast is you get to learn from people, right? But you got a better system than I do of being able to collect all the learnings.
Well, I got a system. Don't always follow the system, but in theory. Hey, so I got to ask you, you said you're from Scotland. I don't detect much of a Scottish accent. Is it still there? Is it still there? If you go home, does it? There's
2 environments where it comes back. One is when I go home, and one is when I've had a few drinks.
Okay. Yeah, good. So you're not having drinks and you're not at home, but if I put you on the spot, could you do a Sean Connery impression?
Oh, I'm the worst. No.
No. Okay.
The girl. No, it's terrible. I got some friends who are great at it, but no, I'm not. I've never been good at mimicking or doing accents.
Okay, so
sorry to let you down.
No worries. What the plan B will be that we'll have to grab beer sometime, and then I'm sure I'll get it out of you. So
that's the thing. That's the thing.
Yeah. So Andrew, thank you so much for coming on the Grow Fast podcast. Really enjoyed the conversation, and really hope to cross paths with you one day soon.
I like that too, Mark. I had a great time. By the way, I didn't say this, but this is the first time I've ever been interviewed on a podcast. So even though I've done 40 odd episodes on my own, this is my first interview. So thank you for making it such a good experience for me. I really enjoyed it.
Likewise. Cheers, Andrew.